Since Adobe switched to a rental model for their software, one of the most popular questions I'm asked is, what's a good alternative? Today I'm looking at the Exposure X5 Photo Manager to see if it's a suitable replacement for the Lightroom library module. But before I jump in to try to answer this question, there's an important point I want to emphasise. Everyone has different requirements for their software. What I might consider an essential feature, you might think is unimportant. Because of this, I'm going to start by listing the Lightroom features that are important to me. These are the fast importing of images to the Lightroom catalogue. I don't want to have to wait for hours for thumbnails to render. I also want to perform batch renaming of images, which I tend to do as part of the import process. After importing my images, I want to be able to browse them easily as well as manage their locations. Assigning keywords to images is important to help me search for images in the future, as well as embedding them in submissions I make to photo libraries. Another feature I use to search for images are the filtering options in Lightroom. The most important of these are the flags, star ratings and colour labels. Sometimes I also find it useful to sort my images based on their metadata. For example, I might want to find an image based on the lens I use or the camera I've used. I also sometimes use Lightroom's image stacking to group related image files together. And finally, the collections in Lightroom are very important to my system of organisation. As I said earlier, you may have a different set of needs, but these are the most important to me. Now let's see if Exposure X5 can meet my requirements. The first thing worth noticing is that Exposure X5 doesn't use a catalogue system like Lightroom and many other Lightroom alternatives. Instead, you can simply browse through the folder structure on your hard drive. As you browse, Exposure renders a thumbnail preview of any image or RAW file it finds. The first time the previews render can take a little time, but it's at least as fast as the Lightroom import, if not faster. Once the preview thumbnails have rendered for a folder, they're quickly displayed when you visit the folder again in the future. This gives the software a good responsive feel that's at least as good, if not better than Lightroom. But where Exposure X5 comes out well ahead of Lightroom for me is that it doesn't use a catalogue to track the images. Because of this, you're free to move and rename files outside of Exposure, unlike with Lightroom. With Lightroom, once you've added an image to the catalogue, you can only move or rename it using Lightroom. If you don't, Lightroom loses track of the files and they become lost. Whilst I know how to manage this, I still lose files from time to time, and I know a lot of people who find it very frustrating. With Exposure, you don't have this issue. It also means that if you edit and save an image using another software package, Exposure automatically picks up the new files. With Lightroom, you must select to synchronize the folders to add the new images. Now let's look at file renaming. This is something I do when I first import my images to Lightroom. I like to keep the original file name, but then prefix it with my name, the camera I used, and the year and month I shot the image. Whilst I don't need to import my images to Exposure X5, I still need to copy them from my memory cards to the hard disk storage. I could do this manually, but Exposure X5 has a copy photos from card feature to help me. This has some similar options to Lightroom's import function, including file renaming. Checking the options, I can see that it easily supports my naming convention and has a lot of flexibility. I can also access the batch renaming feature for images that are already on my hard drive, or I can select and rename individual images. Let's now look at my keywording requirements. This is one of Lightroom's strengths, but Lightroom also has a lot of complexity that can make it difficult to use. In Exposure X5, you can add keywords to images, although the functionality is more limited than in Lightroom. That said, it's probably more than enough for most users. If I select an image, I can manage its keywords in the metadata panel as well as adjusting other metadata. For example, I can add my copyright details to the image, which I can then save as a preset. I can then apply my preset to other images, or I can apply it to every image when I'm copying them from my memory card. Exposure X5 feels very much like Lightroom in this respect. Looking at the actual keywords, I can apply new ones by entering them directly to the keyword field. As I type, Exposure displays possible matching keywords, allowing me to select them with the mouse. I can also speed up the process by using the Keyword Library feature. Here, there's a recent section which displays the keywords I've recently used. If I want to apply one of these to an image, I just click the keyword to add. I can then see the assigned keywords as well as remove them by clicking them. The All option in the library allows me to view all the keywords, but possibly more useful is the Sets option. Here, I can create named groups of keywords that might relate to each other in some way. This makes it easy to select and apply the keywords I want to use. I find this much easier to use than the keywording features in Lightroom, even though I've been using them in Lightroom for years. Let's look now at the options for filtering and sorting images. One feature I use quite a lot in Lightroom is to create image stacks. This groups together related images so that I can collapse the stack and only see the top image in that stack. This makes browsing through sets of images much easier. Unfortunately, Exposure X5 doesn't currently have a comparable feature. It does though support the other image tagging options I use, which are flags, star ratings and colour labels. Using the icons along the bottom of the interface, I can then filter the thumbnails grid to only display the images matching my criteria. I can also filter the images based on my keywords using the Keyword Library. Another feature of Lightroom that I use from time to time is to change the sort order of the images. Again, Exposure has similar features to Lightroom, which makes it very easy to find the files I need. The final feature I want to look at are collections. Like Lightroom, Exposure X5 supports both collections and smart collections. A collection is just a way to group together images you think are related, but which might not be in the same location on your hard drive. Here you can see I've already created a landscape gallery collection from some of my favourite landscape shots. I can easily add new collections, for example a coastal gallery, and then I can move some of my images to that collection. I'll then remove those images from my landscape gallery so that they only exist in one. If I want to add an image to a collection from any of my folders, I can right-click the image and select the collection to add it to. Then there's the Smart Collections. These dynamically select all the images that match one of the criteria I defined. Once you've created a Smart Collection, it's populated automatically with any image that matches your criteria. As a Lightroom user, this all feels very familiar to me. Overall, Exposure X5 certainly meets most of my criteria, and I think it's a viable alternative to Lightroom. It isn't perfect, but it's usable and it's responsive. If you're looking for a Lightroom alternative to use for managing your images, this is certainly one of the best and well worth evaluating. I've also produced a written comparison on my website, and I'll include the link to the video information below. If you have a different alternative to Lightroom, please let me know in the comments below, as I'd like to do more of these comparisons in the future. Also, don't forget to share this video with anyone who might be looking for an alternative to Lightroom. I hope you've enjoyed this review. I'm Whalley, you've been watching Lenscraft. I'll see you soon for another video.